It is a major status symbol, a private jet that can be ready at the drop of a hat and take you anywhere in the world. But a plane can also be a red flag for a judge deciding whether to grant bail. We're digging into Sean Combs' use of his multi-million-dollar jet and what information prosecutors could maybe glean from it as he faces racketeering and sex trafficking charges. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Sean Diddy Combs was recently considered one of the richest music artists in the world. In fact, in 2022, Forbes estimated he was worth almost $1 billion. The only hip-hop artist to reach that threshold before him was Jay-Z a few years ago. But Combs has always flashed his money, right? Going all the way back to the start of Bad Boy Records in the 1990s. By 2002, he was listed as one of America's richest 40 under 40 by Fortune. Now, of course, Combs' net worth is believed to have dropped thanks to several high-profile lawsuits, bad press, his eventual arrest on federal criminal charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, transportation to engage in prostitution. But going back to this at hand, over the years, Combs has shown off his mansions, his cars, his wardrobe, and of course, what we're going to talk about right now, his private jets.
My first time in this thing.
It's gonna be better once some stuff is swapped.
Smell of newness. Fresh mahogany.
So we have this Gulfstream, a G550. It was registered by Love Air LLC sometime in 2020 or 2021. And here's a question. Is there more to that plane or another plane that meets the eye? Could that plane be a source of evidence of anything that Combs is accused of now? Will there be flight manifests that provide information about high-profile people who were on that plane, potential sex workers that were on that plane, alleged accusers on that plane? Because it's important when we talk about sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution, these kinds of charges, there is an element of transporting people over state or international lines. So there is a lot to sort out when it comes to Sean Combs and planes and what was happening in the sky. So for that, I want to bring on aviation attorney Justin T. Green. Justin, thanks so much for coming here on Sidebar. Appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me.
So my first question for you is, and my understanding is there are websites where you can track both public and private aircrafts, but according to the Flight Aware site, you can't track Combs' jet at the request of the owner or operator. And TMZ reports that being unable to track this all-black jet is actually a relatively new development. Can you talk to us about that?
It really isn't for some celebrities who may have a legitimate reason that their jets not be tracked. I can't imagine if Taylor Swift were going to fly into Westchester Airport, how many people would be meeting her there if they were able to track her jet. So I don't think that's the biggest thing. And the operator is required to keep a flight log that would actually indicate, at least where the airplane took off to and where it went. In fact, the operators required to keep certain records by federal regulations, but many of the records may no longer exist because the only one that they have to keep is the flight log.
By the way, really, really appreciate you guys following our continued coverage of the Sean Combs case and all the different facets of it. And I have to call out one of our sponsors because it's with their support that helps us to keep on doing this. And this is called Upside. Now, Upside's awesome. It's a free app that helps you get cash back on daily essentials like gas and groceries. Real cash back, money that appears in your Upside app that you can transfer straight into your bank account. So just the other day, I used Upside to find a gas station. I claimed an offer. I pay with my credit card at the pump, and then I followed the steps on the app to get cash back. And you can use Upside at all different kinds of places, including restaurants and convenience stores. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen and use our promo code SIDEBAR, and you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Now the question is, could Love Air have anything to do with those allegations. In fact, when Combs' mansions in Miami and Los Angeles were raided back in March, there was rampant speculation that Combs had actually fled the country. Turned out to not be true. While Combs was spotted at the Opa-lawka airport in Miami that day, his jet was in Antigua, allegedly coming from California. Now, it's unclear who might have been on board. Justin, here's my question to you. How do you know who is on his plane? When they were on the plane? What kind of information, what kind of records are there?
So the records that an operator has to keep include the itinerary for its flights, the flight log that I just mentioned before, and I think most importantly for the purposes of this conversation, a passenger manifest, who is on board, the souls on board. Now, the problem is that once the airplane is finished with its flights, they have to keep these records for 90 days, except for the flight log that they have to maintain. So it is possible that a operator after 90 days could discard the passenger manifest, in which case you wouldn't know who was on the airplane over 3 months ago. Now, the big issue is there's absolutely no reason. Most of these documents are kept electronically. There'd really be no reason to delete the passenger manifest. And if they go into the records and they find missing records, I think that's going to be a red flag for the investigators.
It's a really good point. Just to put a bow on that, how much information do the logs provide?
The logs are just honestly nothing that's going to really amount. You'll know what time the airplane took off. You know how much fuel was on board. You'll know basic information about the flight, where it went to, where it came from. But it's not going to necessarily give you what happened on the airplane, who was on the airplane. The passenger manifest will tell you who's on it. You know, one point, and obviously the Jeffrey Epstein saga, you know, the crimes that were committed with the use of his airplane, you know, is really top of mind. But one thing that everyone has to realize is that anyone who's on that airplane, if it's a vulnerable person, they're stuck there. It's kind of they can't get out of there until the airplane lands and deplanes. So people on board a private jet are in a very vulnerable position to a bad actor. So I think that's something the investigators have to consider.
Combs' access to a private airplane, it came up because it was a point of concern during his arraignment in the Southern District of New York, because his defense team addressed that in a letter to the judge where they were arguing for a bond. And the letter says, quote, since at least April 2024, Mr. Combs has, and by the way, that is after the raids, Mr. Combs has been making efforts to sell his airplane. We informed the government of these efforts in May of 2024. Just this weekend, Mr. Combs entered into a letter of intent with a party to sell it. Mr. Combs understands he is not to travel to Los Angeles, where the plane had been located this week, and further, that the plane is not to be brought to any district in which he is located until it is sold. Over the past several months, there have been several potential buyers for the airplane, and at least 2 buyers have signed a letter of intent to purchase the aircraft. Due to the nature of this asset and the amount of inspection and due diligence that is required for purchase, it is not a simple asset to offload. So Justin, clearly it seems to me tough to sell a plane from that point of view, but I also thought it was interesting where they were making kind of a promise that he's not going to be with his plane. He's not going to be a risk of flight.
Yeah, I think, obviously it's much easier for someone to get out of the country if they have a private plane. Someone, especially depending on, I guess, the integrity of the operator. If, he would be able to get out of the country and go very quickly to a place that might not be able to bring him back to face the charges that he's facing.
Can I just amplify that point a little bit? Because I've been asked that question a lot. Why didn't he just take off on his private jet and leave? That there is a difficulty there, right? It's not as simple as someone would make it out to be, especially if law enforcement got wind of that. They could have immediately arrested him. Just briefly explain to us why that was more, you see it in the movies, and sometimes you see it in real life, but why is it not so simple to just jump on a plane, take off, go to a country that doesn't extradite you?
Well, it's certainly not difficult to jump on an airplane. But I imagine if he went to an airport and he presented his passport to go to another country, he would have not gotten on that airplane. The FBI would have picked him up. In his private jet, I'm sure they were watching to see where he was going. But just in terms, this is not really an aviation issue, but you're talking about having to go to a country, say Russia, that is going to not send you back to the U.S. based on a request, and you become a kind of a prisoner of that country. Moreover, he would be leaving, all or probably a lot of his assets, certainly not all, but a lot of his assets behind. So I don't think it's a particularly attractive option. Life in exile, especially in a country that is not going to return you to the U.S. It's not like you can go and live in Paris or London. Is not a great choice.
Counter argument to that would be federal prison. But let me ask you this. If this was a key piece of evidence, right? If this plane was a key piece of evidence in this case, would the government even allow Sean Combs to sell it?
Well, the question that I had when you were asking me the question was whether the airplane itself is a crime scene, whether some of the activities that he is, being accused of occurred on the airplane, in which case I think it's something, kind of a CSI question, whether there's evidence, putting aside the manifest, putting aside the flight log, and putting aside the flight planning documents, anything else that, is likely available, whether there's actual evidence of misconduct in the fibers on the rugs, on the carpeting of that airplane or elsewhere. So that's really a question for the FBI.
Now, wanted to ask you something else about this letter. So it says, in advance of the plane being sold, this is again the defense's letter on bail, in advance of the plane being sold, which it eventually will be, we have agreed to keep the airplane in Los Angeles while Mr. Combs resides in his home in Florida if it is not being chartered. Coincidentally, and not at Mr. Combs' request, last night, the airplane was chartered on a Part 135 flight from Los Angeles to Teterboro, New Jersey. Mr. Combs had no advance knowledge of the flight, nor did he possess any control over its movement last night. Obviously, Mr. Combs agrees to not go to any state, in this case New Jersey, in which his airplane is located pending its sale, which is actively being pursued. And my understanding is Part 135 refers to a certificate from the FAA for private planes. What did you make of that? Yeah, what did you make of that?
Well, I mean, it sounds like they're chartering the airplane out. So somebody who wants to charter it for a flight here from California to Teterboro could basically just pay for it, and the operator will operate it. And Sean just owns the airplane, doesn't know, Mr. Combs owns the airplane, doesn't know anything about it. The problem I have is once it's in Teterboro, it's pretty damn close to where he's at. So I think that's, once it's off charter, he still owns the airplane. So an hour away by car, if he was out, he'd be in Teterboro with his airplane.
One of the things that I've always wondered, if he was trying to sell the plane, how much would he get for it? So I was thinking, if he's trying to sell it, might need the funds to pay for all of these legal expenses. He has a lot of legal exposure right now, being sued by multiple people. He's now going to have to fight this criminal case. How much could you get for a private airplane?
I mean, I'd have to look it up, but the first thing I would do if I bought that airplane is go to the FAA and ask them to change its side number. So that you're flying around with the same N number, we call it, that Mr. Combs flew around with. But I don't think it has any less or better value than any other airplane. But I would not want to be flying around with the same N number, the FAA's number for the airplane.
So, by the way, back in late March, this was again, I believe, after the raids, TMZ was reporting that all of the companies that Combs used to charter flights, that they were going to receive subpoenas. It seems, investigators wanted to know who connected with Combs, had flown at his expense, maybe look for potential victims, witnesses that can confirm or deny some of these allegations. But Justin, interestingly, I didn't see anything in the indictment or in the government's letters regarding bail where they mentioned subpoenaing charter companies or getting information about the plane or planes, nothing about that. And it makes me wonder, were these charter companies actually subpoenaed? Was there any information that was relevant that was obtained? And the fact that it wasn't mentioned, I don't know if it's going to be part of the criminal case, but it was interesting for me to see that and try to determine whether or not this plane is relevant to the case.
Yeah, I think it depends on what records they kept. Now, they should have kept the itinerary for all the flights. They should have kept the flight log. Honestly, even though they don't legally have to, they should have the passenger manifest, the weight and balance, the flight plans, and any of the dispatch records. So the investigators would have a decent package, assuming all those documents are available. In which case, now they have the witnesses. So now they have who was on each flight, who were the pilots, maybe more importantly, who were the flight attendants, who were the passengers. And I imagine this may just be like Epstein, where people hope that they are not on any of these manifests because they may be, not saying they did anything wrong, but that they may be subject to being interviewed by the FBI about what happened on each particular flight.
Yeah, it's a good point. And look, over the years, I should say this when it comes to this plane, many celebrities have posted on social media about flying on Combs' private jet. This included his recent girlfriend, Young Miami, real name Koresha Brownlee. She and another of Combs' associates, Brendan Paul, they have been accused of transporting drugs for Combs on his jet. I say that because Rodney Little Rod Jones, the music producer who sued Combs, referred to Paul as a drug mule. And he claims that he used copious amounts of drugs pretty much around the clock. In Jones' sexual assault, sexual harassment, sex trafficking complaint against Combs, there is a footnote that reads, defendant Sean Combs wanted 2C, but Brendan forgot it, so defendant Christina called Young Miami, who then brought it on the private jet from Miami. Now, 2C is a party drug. It's also known as pink cocaine. It's actually a mixture of a lot of different drugs together with the pink color added for looks. And Christina is accused by Jones of being Combs' essentially right-hand woman. He even drew comparisons to Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's madam, who helped him procure young girls. On the same day that Combs' homes were raided by Homeland Security investigators, Brendan Paul was actually arrested for drug possession at the Opa-locka Airport in Florida. He entered a plea deal in May where he was allowed to enter a drug diversion program, avoid jail time. Justin, Jones' complaint alleges that this plane was not only being used to transport people, but also narcotics. So is that something that's easier to do on a private flight? I mean, who's checking to make sure everything's on the up and up?
It is. It is 100%, 1,000% easier to transport illegal drugs, to transport weapons, to transport any illicit materials on a private jet, and if you have to go through security at the airport and run the risk of having drug dogs sniff out whatever you're carrying. And that's just a fact of life. At any airport in this country, people can basically just walk out in the flight line, get in their own jet, take whatever they want, and go wherever they want.
By the way, I want to go back to one more thing about the passenger manifests. Who writes those, and they're supposed to be accurate? What happens if they're not accurate? Because I'm imagining, let's say they were kept, and they do have passenger manifests, just let's hypothetically say for the last 2-3 years. How do you know they're accurate? Do prosecutors go back and try to find I mean, who writes them up, and are they generally accurate?
The operator, the entity that's operating the aircraft is responsible for keeping the passenger manifest. So typically it would be the pilot, flight attendant taking the names and putting it on the flight manifest. Now, is it possible that somebody gets on the airplane and says, "Hey, don't put this person on the manifest"? And because of your celebrity and because of your power, the operator, takes someone off? Yes, it's definitely possible. So I think there's a lot of integrity that's in the area. Most operators, a pilot who takes a flight without putting someone on a manifest is risking his or her license. An operator who does that is risking their operating certificate. So there's a lot of reasons why people comply with the rules, putting aside integrity. But it is definitely possible. More, you know, I think they're not checking what they're carrying. So I think in terms of illicit materials, weapons, drugs, other than taking the names, they're not, they don't know the details of why this particular person's on this particular flight. So I do think it's likely that the manifest exists. It's likely, hopeful that it is complete. If it's not complete, you have witnesses. You have the dispatch, the operator witnesses, the pilot, the flight attendant, the other passengers on board, where they can actually determine, why this particular record, why the flight took this particular flight with no one on board. Was it in fact a positioning flight where no one was on board, or was it a flight where they just didn't put the passengers on it?
Now, one of the most recent women to file a lawsuit against Combs is Dawn Richard, and she alleges that she was trafficked on what would have, I believe, have been an older plane, since her allegations are from 2009. But the former member of the girl group Danity Kane, she filed a lawsuit on September 10th claiming that Combs sexually and verbally abused her for a decade. She also claimed that Combs owes her more than $3 million in unpaid salary and royalties, as well as unpaid wages for touring. And in her lawsuit, it says, quote, in or around November 2009, after the Soul Train Awards in Atlanta, Georgia, Mr. Combs flew Miss Richard and Miss Harper to his house in New York on his private jet for an after party. There were many well-known celebrities at the after party, and copious amounts of illegal drugs were being openly consumed. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs had arranged for dozens of young women and girls, some of whom appeared to be underage, to be transported to the party. So again, just going full circle, we can see why the plane plays such an important role, not only in these civil cases, but if we're talking about sex trafficking and we're talking about transportation of people, it's important in the criminal case.
Yeah, like you said it on the outset, they're taking people from one part of the country across state lines to another part, and it facilitates whatever crime occurred at that party was facilitated by his use of this jet. So obviously a lot remains to be seen in the litigation, in the prosecution, and also the civil cases. But the jet is a key piece of evidence here.
Justin, thank you so much for coming on. Again, really appreciate your time. Justin Green, we look forward to speaking with you again.
Anytime. Thanks a lot.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.